Fernanda, she has a lot of potential. You must understand that this is only prudent financial planning." Our small dining room was filled with the echoes of my mother's remarks, each one adding a brick to the wall that was being constructed between us. In my shaking palms, I gazed at the Stanford University admission letter. What should have been a moment of joy turned into one of the most agonizing experiences of my 18 years. I struggled to maintain my composure as I said, "I got a scholarship that covers half the tuition, and my grades are better than Camilla's were when you paid for her to go to UCLA." With a groan, my father avoided looking at me. "Mija, it's not only about grades. Camilla is pursuing a career in medicine, which is a sure thing. To put it simply, computer science is unstable. When all of those at jobs relocate abroad, what will happen?" "Dad, they have been saying it for 20 years. In the meanwhile, the sector continues to expand." In an obviously theatrical gesture of pity, my mother reached across the table and patted my hand. "We're not advocating against attending college. Here in Sacramento, there is a community college. After 2 years, you might transfer to state. For someone with your skills, that is the logical course of action." My skills? As if my sister's B+ average and unwavering will to become a doctor, like our father, were somehow more impressive than my 4.0 GPA, winning coding competitions, and having a flawless S8 math score. My father stated, "We can't sink ourselves financially when your sister's education is already so expensive," as if the conversation had come to an end. "It wouldn't be fair to the family." The family. The family is always the family. With the exception of my future and my ambitions, then, all of a sudden I was apart, an investment thought to be overly dangerous. At the age of 18, I realized that I was ranked second in my family's ladder of potential. My name is Fernanda Reyes, the fallback kid. It is assumed that the pragmatic one will accept less. I only wanted the same possibilities that my sister was given, the opportunity to enroll at a prestigious university without overworking myself, the backing of the two individuals who were meant to have unwavering faith in me. The obstacle I faced was as straightforward. My parents' unwavering belief that my sister's medical goals naturally took precedence over my technical goals. Their pragmatism cloaked pecuniary favoritism. Their narrow definition of success was incompatible with the aspirations of Silicon Valley. I sat on my bed that night with acceptance letters from colleges I was no longer able to afford. In order to make Stanford conceivable, I determined how many hours I would have to work while enrolled in all of my classes. The maths was harsh, almost difficult. My phone lighted up with a text from Camilla saying, "Just heard about Stanford," as I was finally falling asleep. In any case, medication was always the best option. One day you'll thank your parents. It seems that even my sister had come to terms with the family narrative that I was stepping over my proper boundaries. Growing up in the Reyes household meant understanding your position in the family ecosystem early. My father, Dr. Gabriel Reyes, was a respected cardiologist whose immigrant parents had sacrificed everything to send him to medical school. My mother, Elena, had given up her teaching career to support his rise in the medical community and raise their children. Sacrifices she reminded us of regularly. From the beginning, Camilla embraced the predetermined path. 3 years my senior, she played with toy stethoscopes while I dismantled electronic toys to understand their circuitry. She joined future doctor clubs. I built computers from salvaged parts. She shadowed our father at the hospital. I taught myself coding languages from library books. Our parents celebrated every step of Camilla's journey toward medicine. Her science fair victories warranted family dinners out. My state-level programming competition wins received polite nods. When Camilla was accepted to UCLA's pre-med program, our parents threw an elaborate party. My acceptance to Stanford's computer science program, one of the most competitive in the world, was met with concerned discussions about financial practicality. I didn't resent Camilla, not really. She worked hard for her achievements, and her dream of becoming a neurosurgeon was genuine. What I resented was the unquestioned assumption that her path was inherently more valuable than mine. Despite this, I maintained the peace. I helped her study for organic chemistry exams over video calls. I listened patiently to her complaints about difficult professors. I celebrated her successes, sincerely believing that someday my own achievements would receive the same recognition. There were warning signs I chose to ignore. When I needed a new laptop for a coding project in high school, I had to earn the money myself, while Camilla's NCAT prep course, twice as expensive, was covered without question. When I expressed interest in a summer coding camp, my mother suggested I babysit neighborhood children for income instead. Meanwhile, Camilla attended a medical immersion program in Chicago, fully funded by our parents. "Your sister needs these experiences for medical school applications," my father explained when I questioned the disparity. "Those are incredibly competitive," as if Stanford's 4% acceptance rate wasn't competitive. Still, I believed that once I proved myself, once I showed that computer science was a worthwhile path, my parents would recognize my potential too. I clung to this hope through my senior year, applying for every scholarship available, working weekends at a local electronics store, and maintaining perfect grades. The Stanford acceptance letter was supposed to be my vindication. Instead, it became the clearest evidence, yet that, in my parents' eyes, I would always be the lesser investment, the daughter whose dreams were expendable when resources grew tight. The summer after high school graduation passed in a blur of exhaustion. While my classmates enjoyed their last carefree months before college, I worked 3 jobs: morning shifts at a coffee shop, afternoon hours at the electronics store, and evenings doing freelance website development for local businesses. I slept 4 hours a night, saved every penny, and researched student loans until my eyes burned. By August, I had saved enough for my first semester's housing and books, secured loans for tuition, and lined up a part-time job at Stanford's IT department. It wouldn't be easy, but I was going, with or without my parents' support. The night before I left for college, my family held a small dinner. The conversation revolved almost entirely around Camilla's upcoming semester at UCLA Medical School, her challenging course load, her brilliant professors. My imminent departure for Stanford was an afterthought, mentioned only when I brought up logistics about my flight the next day. As dinner ended, my father disappeared into his study, returning with an envelope that he handed to me with a tight smile. "A little something to help with expenses," he said. "We wish it could be more." Inside was a check for $500, less than 1% of a year's tuition at Stanford. "Thank you," I managed, tucking it away. Later, I overheard my parents in the kitchen. "I still think we should have given her more," my mother said. "Stanford is so expensive." "We've been over this, Elena," my father replied, his voice tired but firm. "We're already stretching our budget with Camilla's medical school. Fernanda chose this path knowing we couldn't support it. Besides, tech companies hire kids right out of high school these days. College isn't as necessary in her field." "I suppose you're right," my mother sighed, "and Camilla's education has to come first. She's going to be a doctor after all." The familiar ache in my chest sharpened into something new, a clarity that cut through years of making excuses for their behavior. This wasn't about financial practicality. It had never been. My parents had simply decided long ago which daughter's dreams were worth investing in. The next morning, my father drove me to the airport in silence. As we approached the terminal, he finally spoke. "You know we're proud of you, right? Going to Stanford is a great accomplishment." "Just not one worth paying for," I replied quietly. He frowned. "That's not fair, Fernanda. We've explained our situation." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak further. As I collected my bags from the trunk, he awkwardly patted my shoulder. "Call when you land," he said. "And remember, if it gets too difficult financially, There's always the option to transfer somewhere more affordable. In that moment, I made a silent vow to myself. I would never transfer. I would never give up. And most importantly, I would never again expect my parents to believe in me. From now on, I would believe in myself enough for all of us. I walked into the terminal without looking back, carrying the weight of my belongings, my loans, and the knowledge that I was truly on my own. My first semester at Stanford was a brutal education in sleep deprivation. I took a maximum course load, worked 20 hours a week at the IT department, and spent weekends doing freelance web development. I lived on ramen and coffee. I studied until my vision blurred and still managed to make the dean's list. When winter break arrived, I couldn't afford the flight home to Sacramento, so I stayed in the dorms, one of the few students remaining on the nearly empty campus. I called my parents on Christmas Day. "We miss you, Mija," my mother said, her voice crackling over the poor connection. "It's not the same without you." In the background, I could hear laughter and music, the annual Reyes family gathering in full swing. "I miss you too," I replied, not mentioning that I could have been there if they'd offered to help with the flight. "Canela got straight A's this semester," my father chimed in proudly. "Her professors say she has exceptional potential. How are your computer classes going?" "They're computer science courses, Dad, and they're going well." I made the dean's list. "That's nice," he said, his tone suggesting this achievement was expected rather than exceptional. "Say, we've been thinking. This separation is hard on all of us. There's still time to transfer to Sacramento State for spring semester. You could live at home, save money." The suggestion wasn't new, just more persistent. Every phone call included some variation of this same pitch. Sacrifice your dreams for something more practical, more local, more aligned with our idea of success. "I'm doing well here, Dad. This is where I need to be." The conversation shifted to other topics, but the underlying message was clear. My parents still considered my Stanford education a temporary rebellion rather than a legitimate path. When sophomore year began, I added another job to my workload, research assistant to Professor James Wilson, whose work in artificial intelligence was revolutionizing the field. The position paid barely minimum wage but offered something more valuable: mentorship from one of the brightest minds in computer science. Professor Wilson noticed my exhaustion one evening as I nodded off during a late research session. "Miss Reyes," he said, his voice startling me awake, "when was the last time you slept for more than 4 hours?" I blinked, trying to remember. "Last weekend, maybe." He frowned. "This isn't sustainable. Your work is excellent, but you're going to burn out." "I don't have a choice," I admitted. "My parents are only supporting my sister through medical school. I'm on my own." Something in his expression shifted. "Come to my office tomorrow. I want to discuss your research more thoroughly." The next day, Professor Wilson offered me a position on his newest project, a study that came with a stipend 3 times what I was making as a research assistant. The work was challenging and directly aligned with my interests in machine learning. "This isn't charity," he clarified, seeing my hesitation. "Your algorithms improved our last project's efficiency by 22%. You've earned this." For the first time since arriving at Stanford, I could reduce my work hours slightly. I could occasionally buy fresh groceries instead of ramen. I could breathe. When I called my parents with the news, their response was lukewarm. "That's nice, dear, but is there job security in research?" My mother asked. "Canela just got accepted for a prestigious hospital internship. It's practically guaranteeing her residency position." The comparison was automatic, reflexive, my achievement immediately measured against my sister's and found wanting. That night, I stared at my reflection in the bathroom mirror, exhaustion etched in the dark circles under my eyes, despite my slightly lighter workload. The voice in my head that had always whispered prove them wrong was getting harder to hear beneath the weight of their constant dismissal. Maybe they were right. Maybe I was following a foolish dream destined for disappointment, while Camilla walked the sure path to success. The thought terrified me more than any all-nighter ever could. Junior year, everything changed. Professor Wilson introduced me to Dr. Sanjay Patel, a former student of his who had founded a successful AI startup and was visiting Stanford to recruit talent. After reviewing my work, Dr. Patel offered me a summer internship at his company in San Francisco. The internship paid enough that I could finally quit my other jobs. For 3 months, I worked alongside brilliant engineers developing algorithms to help businesses optimize their operations. My specific project, a predictive modeling system for supply chain management, caught the attention of the executive team. On my last day, Dr. Patel called me into his office. "We'd like to offer you a position after graduation," he said. "Your work this summer has been exceptional." The salary he named was more than I'd imagined making even several years out of college. For the first time, I could see a clear path forward, one that wouldn't require working myself to exhaustion. When I called my parents with the news, their response was unexpectedly enthusiastic, an actual job offer already. My mother exclaimed, "Maybe there is something to this computer science after all." My father actually asked questions about the company, the position, and the industry. For once, they seemed genuinely impressed. Their newfound interest felt validating, but something about it also bothered me. Why was external validation from a company more meaningful to them than my academic achievements? Why did money suddenly make my path legitimate when passion and hard work hadn't